talking about sexual selection, and I asked the question: do humans participate in? Do they participate in sexual selection? And then I gave you a couple pictures. This is the women of the Babilla tribe, and of course they, in order to make themselves more attractive, they expand their upper lips. And of course, if you don't do that, then you can't find a husband. Same thing with the Chinese. They used to bind their feet. Chinese have little bitty tiny feet. They're not very large feet anyway. Sexual selection. But then of course, even the women that had larger feet, they started binding their feet so that they had tiny feet. You go to Europe, it's really hard to find anybody with large feet. As I told you last time, when I was in Korea, I couldn't find any shoes that fit me. I was looking for soccer shoes, and at the time I think I wore an 11 and a half or 12, and I couldn't find anything. Finally I did. I found a pair of shoes that they had specially made for some, big-footed American guy, and I bought them. Of course they said, "You're too short to have feet that big." Of course they said it in Korean. American Indians, of course, have participated in changing the way that they appear. This is from Lewis and Clark. This is how they used to flatten their foreheads. The flatter the forehead, the higher the crown on your head, the taller you were, for one thing, but then the more, attractive you looked. Anyway, this is the flatheads over in Montana used to do this. They used to do this down in South America. When we were in Peru, we went to the museum. And in the museum they had skulls. Some of them were heart-shaped skulls. So they put a band across the middle of their heads. I don't know. Yeah, very, very strange. Some of the things they did to skulls, but as you can see, this is how it works. They just kind of flatten the forehead out, and of course they push the skull up. Yeah. I'm surprised you don't do this. You don't do this to any of your kids?
No. I think once I noticed they're in a cradle. Some infants are on cradle boards.
Oh, flattens the back of the head.
Yeah, they move the head this way, or when they're sleeping, they move it around.
Huh. Just to keep it.
Yeah. So in boarding school, when you see somebody with a flat head, then they start
making fun of it.
Hey, you've been in the cradle board too long. Or say stuff like, forgot you in the cradle board.
Oh, I never even thought about that. Victorian era, of course, you want it to be as slender as possible. And what they did, they bound their waists so that they could have 18, 20-inch waists. Elizabeth Taylor, when she was young, was said to have a very, very narrow waist, like 18, 20 inches. But this is how they used to do it. Of course, hers was natural. If you do it this way, what happens is you push all your organs either up into your thorax or down into your abdomen. I don't know. It seems kind of odd. If you don't have a naturally narrow waist, I guess this is one way to do it. Losing weight is probably too difficult. Scarification is another example of sexual selection. The guy with the best scars is the guy that gets all the chicks, as odd as that may seem. This is another look at natural selection. The guy on the left, our left, his right, is a pygmy, and the guy on the right is a Cherokee Indian. And of course, Cherokee Indians sexually selected for height, and the pygmies sexually selected for being short. Tall individuals of that group couldn't survive in the rainforest. The very, very thick rainforests. Only the little guys were the ones that survived. And then, of course, when you're on the Great Plains, you want to be as tall as possible, so that you can down it's raining better. So that you can down a buffalo. When I was up in Montana, they used to talk about the taller you were, the better you could kill a buffalo because you could shoot down on them. That was the idea. So they had all these, 6'6", 6'8" basketball players that claimed that, they would have been a very successful buffalo hunter because they were so tall they could shoot down on the buffalo. I don't know if it was a joke or something, but anyway, they used to tell me that all the time. And of course I'm thinking, yeah, so what am I supposed to do, shoot up at the buffalo? Come on. Tattoos, another form of sexual selection. The guy with the most fearsome tattoos was the one that won the day with the women. And there you go. We're getting into the modern era. Well, not yet. Okay. As you can see, this is in Thailand. These women, you can see their earlobes go all the way down to their shoulders. As attractive as that is. Everybody's looking for droopy earlobes. Earlobes are really kind of funny. If you check your own earlobes out, if your earlobes are not attached or are attached, if you have a really small earlobe, then that's what they're looking for in Hollywood. So if your earlobe is attached and it's not very big, then you can become an actor or an actress. My son has detached earlobes, and he was out in Hollywood trying to be an actor, and of course they tell him, well, your face is too narrow, you look too Midwestern, your earlobes are too big. These really strange things to tell people. But earlobes really seem to be fairly important. Some people have detached earlobes and some people have attached earlobes. But the next time you're watching a movie or a television show, see if they have their earlobes attached or not. See if you can find anybody with detached earlobes. It's really quite rare, in the movies anyway. I don't know if people are going to start having surgery to attach their earlobes and cut down their earlobes. The more earlobe you have, the more earrings you can make. But how important are earrings anyway? I don't know. We'll find out in a second. This is in Thailand as well. These women put brass rings around their necks to make their necks look longer, and they put brass rings around their ankles. The reason they put the that they have these brass rings is because it's supposed to show their wealth. It's also supposed to make them more attractive. For a long time, they thought what they were doing was stretching out their necks, but the reality is that what they're doing is compressing their shoulders. So it's pushing their shoulders down. So that's why they look like they have such long necks. They have the same neck that everybody else has, but it's just compressing their shoulders, pushing their shoulders down, their clavicles, as odd as that may seem. Okay, now we get into the modern era. Nope, not yet. So if you go onto the plains of Africa, the men tend to be relatively tall. Some of them in the 7 to 7.5 foot range. Very slender gentlemen, but the way that they seduce the young women of the tribe is by jumping, and so the higher you can jump. Just standing there, and that's what they do. You can see how he's doing it. He's popping up and kicking one leg way up, and the other leg, he's dragging the other leg. But the higher you can jump, the more attractive you are to the young ladies. And these are the Maasai of southern plains, of the southern African plains. They're cattle herders. They drink milk and they mix it with cow blood. And that's cow blood. Yeah, they slit their jugular, not kill them. They don't kill them. They're just collecting blood. So they'll mix the blood and the milk together. That's what they eat.
And that's kind of what makes them tolerant. The milk?
No, that's just what they eat. That's just what they eat. It's just what they eat. Other tribes will butcher their cattle, but these guys try not to butcher their cattle unless they're old or won't reproduce, and then they'll butcher them. But they normally just drink the milk and drink the blood. The reality is you can't really put that much blood on your stomach because it's toxic and will make you vomit. It's one of the reasons if you've ever had a bloody nose and you swallowed most of the blood down into your stomach and you got a stomach full of blood, you probably vomited it out. No? Okay, anyway, don't ever try to put a lot of blood on your stomach. And that's one of the reasons why we don't drink blood. I mean, you can't. If you do, it's toxic and it will you'll lose it fairly quickly. Okay, one more group. Here we go. These guys are from the Sahara Desert. The Watanabe. And the women don't put on makeup, but the men do. These are the men of the tribe, and they. The way that they show power is by moving their eyes separately. They can move their eyes separately, and the more they can move their eyes, the more likely they are to seduce the young females of their tribe. So as you can see, they will spend all of their money on clothes, hats and makeup and whatnot. And they try to look distinctive, of course. They're really fascinating people. They consider themselves the most beautiful people on earth. Who can argue? Who can argue? Of course, all of these people think that they're the most gorgeous people on earth, but these guys know that they're the most gorgeous people on earth because nobody else can induce their women to go with them, except unless you do this kind of stuff. Okay. The Maasai, of course, know that they're the most beautiful people on earth, and so do the Thais, and so do the Thais, and so do the Maoris, and so do the Pygmies and the Cherokee, and so do the other African tribes with all their scars and whatnot. And the slender women of the Victorian era, and the Flathead Indians of the Northwest, and the Chinese women with their tiny feet, and the Ubangis. Yeah, they all know that they're the most beautiful people on earth. But we all know who the most beautiful people on earth are. There we go, exactly. Yeah, it's us people in the United States. I was talking about earrings before. There you go. All the studs you want. I guess you could call him a stud. Stud man, there you go. But of course, with every stud man, you need a stud woman. You're cringing.
Yeah, it looks like it's...
Can you imagine trying to kiss somebody with all that stuff on their bodies? Neither can I. And thank goodness I don't have to think about it. Anyway, okay. So sexual selection, if we look at all these things, most of them are things that people do to themselves. But there was one case where it didn't have anything to do with what you did to yourself. It had to do with just who you were. Which picture was that?
The tie?
I'm sorry?
Was it the tie?
No, they expand their earlobes or put those rings around their neck. So which one of these pictures represents actual sexual selection? They all actually do to some extent, but one of them has to do with natural selection. I mean, these ladies put discs in their mouths. That lady they wrapped her feet. Skinny lady, or not. So which one represents an actual natural selection?
I just say the jumping.
The jumping?
Well, maybe the one previous before that.
You know, I think you're right. I think the jumping one is correct. Wait a minute, the one just before
That
that.
one.
That one?
That's like
They
more
paint-
hypnotizing or something.
They paint themselves. Okay. They train themselves to
Move their eyes.
move their eyes individually.
Now something just occurred, something just popped into my head.
Yeah.
I was talking natural selection and enhancing yourself with that fall with circumcision too. We're just talking about.
Sure. Of course.
It's like-
Yeah, circumcision, yeah, that's something that you do to yourself to make yourself more attractive. I'm not exactly sure why they started circumcision. It may have been for cleanliness.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least for, yeah, they like for, to not develop bacteria or something.
Right, but it seemed, I mean, let's cut away a piece of your body to make you cleaner. Who came up with that idea? I mean, we don't cut off our noses, so it makes it easier to blow our noses.
Maybe in the Bible, it also says.
Oh yeah, it does. It says it in the Bible. That's right. The Jewish people started circumcising, and now maybe we rationalize it. Maybe the Jewish people started circumcising their males, and so now we rationalize the fact that, oh, it's cleaner. Oh yeah, okay. Well, whoever thought of, let's cut away that foreskin part, that extra chunk of skin around the penis. Why is that chunk of skin there? Is there a reason for it, or is there no reason for it? Is it just, why is it there?
Yeah. There's another one too. I noticed that when I usually go into towns or cities, is people with have their hairdos. Sometimes they'll have a mohawk, and
Okay.
sometimes they'll have one with like a B-52 kind of,
Okay.
or sometimes just a straight shave off. Sometimes we
Flat top, we used to call them flat tops.
Yeah. So how about like hairdos? Are they're probably
Sure.
like
It's well, let's to attract the opposite sex.
yeah.
There's still a couple of congressmen who have flat tops. One of them's John Tester of Montana. So that ought to be interesting. He still has a flat top. So why is the foreskin there? Is there a reason for it? I mean, why would we evolve? There are things that are extra chunks that we don't need. The appendix, for example. We don't need the appendix. It doesn't do anything. It's just like the end of your intestines. So why is it there?
Maybe for protection, I'm thinking.
Protection. It's exactly what it was. It's to protect the end of the penis. You certainly wouldn't want to lose the end of your penis. That might keep you from ever having to reproduce. This is the one picture that has to do with actual natural selection without any
Yeah,
enhancement.
oh yeah.
The tall Cherokee guy, because to hunt buffalo. This guy doesn't hunt buffalo, he hunts smaller game in the rainforests of Africa. So if he went to the rainforest of Africa, he would probably starve to death because he would be too big to get around, for one thing. If this guy tried to hunt buffalo, probably he wouldn't survive either. So it had to do with a niche population. So there is sexual selection. Humans, if it's not a natural selection, then potentially it has something to do with fitting into the environment. In this case, it has to do with fitting into the environment, of course. With those two Would he look for a wife in this person's tribe? Probably not. I'm guessing not. Would he look for a wife in his person, in the other guy's tribe? Probably not. They wouldn't find them attractive for one thing, because they would be, well, I mean, yeah, it's like anything else. It would be very odd, and they certainly wouldn't look for a wife there. And unless you like earlobes, I don't know, them earlobes are pretty hot. We're getting steamy in here. There we go, long necks. We do like the long necks. We do like high jumping men, of course. And the rolling of the eyes has something to do with something. I'm not exactly sure what. And of course, we come down to stud man and his wife, stud woman. I know. Understanding the phylogeny of species allows us to study the behavioral and neural adaptations that allowed animals to exploit particular ecological niches. And that's what we saw with the pygmy and the Cherokee. They were exploiting particular ecological niches. One of the, what we can assume about humans, we've always gone someplace where we could find enough food. No matter what humans we're talking about, whether we're talking about in Africa, we're talking about Australia, we're talking about Asia, we're talking about North America or Europe, it really doesn't matter. If we're talking about Neanderthal men, we're dealing with an individual that was around during the Ice Age, when there were glaciers. And this individual had to survive in that type of an environment. Potentially there were no white people until they ran into the glaciers. At that point, if you're that close to ice, and of course the sun's coming down, what it creates is steam. It creates a lot of atmosphere because of the melting ice, and potentially there was a lot of cloud cover. Because there was a lot of cloud cover, the individuals that were the darker complexion couldn't get enough vitamin D. Therefore, the only people that survived were the ones with the lighter and lighter and lighter skin. They needed to get that vitamin D, and it was specifically the females, more than the males, that needed the vitamin D in order to survive. So potentially that has something to do with an ecological niche. So the closer they got to the glaciers, the more that they needed pale skin. The dark-skinned ones were never able to survive because their skin was too dark. They couldn't take in enough vitamin D. They died at a relatively young age, and potentially they couldn't reproduce because they were dying too young. Since they weren't getting enough vitamin D, their bones were not developing normally, and probably they were never able to carry a pregnancy to term, potentially. So the lighter-skinned females were the ones that were able to reproduce. The darker-skinned females were not able to reproduce. Thank you. Appreciate that. I forgot all about this.
Thank you.
Comparative studies may focus on specific differences between closely related species or may be concerned with general principles across larger numbers of species, but in each case, the use of an evolutionary framework provides additional explanatory power. So the reality is that we need to, when we think of these things, oh, you don't have to? No. So potentially what we have to do when we look at a different species or a species that is different in two different places, we have to realize that these individuals potentially are different because they need to fit in their evolutionary niche. So the ones that were successful were the ones that developed this or that or whatever. The sexual selection part has to do with the individual that was the most successful. The man that you would want to reproduce with would be the man that was able to hunt the best, the man that was able to provide the best, or maybe it was a spiritual leader, the man that everybody gave food to. So this is one of the ways that we have survived, by adapting to our environments. And of course, this is the way we figure things out. The two animals that are the closest to humans are actually the pygmy chimpanzee, the bonobo, and the common chimpanzee. Much more powerful animals than humans are. Their arm muscles are much stronger than humans are. They also have bigger bellies, and the reason they have bigger bellies is because humans gave up the power to digest their food, digest any food, for the size of their brains. And that's the assumption anyway. The reason we have such big brains is because we have flat abdomens, as compared to the bonobo and the chimpanzee. And they have smaller brains than we do because they didn't need them. They can eat just about anything. They can digest just about anything because their intestines are much longer than ours. We have smaller intestines. We can only digest food in a different manner, and that's why our brains grew bigger. The other reason has to do with the fact that we cook our food, and that we pre-digest our food. We start to digest our food through cooking, and of course the animals don't. They have to digest it. That's one of the reasons why their intestines are so much longer than ours, and their abdomens are larger. The principles of neural function revealed by comparative anatomy studies may often be generalized to many species, including humans. And for this reason, if you look at many psychology texts or journals, the journals will have experiments on animals. We try not to experiment on humans, especially if we have to euthanize them and look at their brains. We certainly wouldn't want to use a human, but it's okay if we use other animals. We've gotten to the point where we no longer use monkeys and chimpanzees in biological and psychological studies. It wasn't 20 or 30 years ago that this was very common. And of course, they tend to be relatively expensive, but people got upset about the fact that they seemed so human. And the reality is they're closer to humans than any other animal group. So we stopped doing research with these animals. The problem was we had all these animals, and what do you do with them? What do you do with them? If you're not going to do experiments on them. I mean, one day we were doing experiments and the next day we weren't. So what do? Just house them until they die?
I think they just expire them.
Euthanize them? It's like killing your dog. Oh, we don't like dogs anymore. Here, shoot Fluffy and Sam and just blow their brains out. No, they took them down to Louisiana. They let them go and eat that. They have these parks where they just let them run free. Yeah, they're going to wait till they die. Of course, they won't because they're reproducing and whatnot. So this should get very interesting. We don't really have any monkeys or chimpanzees in this portion of North America. They have some in the Mayan, in the Yucatan, that area. They have monkeys. They have what did we run into? Howler monkeys. They have howler monkeys. They're big. They're really big. When they reproduce, they'll make a lot of noise as possible, and they'll shake the trees to show the female that they're large and here, have sex with me. I'm big, and I can make a lot of noise. We were down there when they were howling. It was really, it's really strange. And we saw them. You can hear them from miles and miles away. We were right there beside this one guy that was looking for a girlfriend, and he was just shaking the top of the tree and screaming. It was great. Major divisions of the brain are shared by the vertebrates. Brain differences between species of vertebrates can often be directly related to their ecology and behavioral complexity. And as you can see, these are different brains. This is a human brain. This is a gorilla brain. This is a chimpanzee brain, I guess. and another type of monkey, and as we get smaller and smaller, you can see the brains are changing. Such differences tend to be quantitative in nature. Relative size of brain regions or the size of neurons is a good example. And as you can see, the human brain is far more complex than the gorilla brain is. We have more convolutions and valleys in convolutions. The field of classifying animals is known as taxonomy. Taxonomy is an ongoing endeavor. Taxonomy can be done in many ways, including paleontology, studying fossil remains. Of course, this is one of the things that we do. We look at fossils to see how they have changed over time, how skeletal structures have changed over time. We can compare animal DNA with human DNA, and of course we already compared the chimpanzee with the human, and we found that humans and chimpanzees share 98.4% of their DNA. So 98.4% of our DNA is chimpanzee DNA. Once upon a time, of course, people would get really upset if you said that humans and monkeys were related. They get real upset. As a matter of fact, in the United States, we've had trials for people that actually they've actually sued these individuals for preaching the fact that humans and chimpanzees are close to each other in evolution. It's known as evolution. There are some states where there is a state where you cannot teach evolution. Does anybody know what state that is where you can't teach evolution? You'd think it would be someplace like Tennessee or Georgia, Mississippi.
I'm going to say Utah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's Kansas. Yeah, Kansas. Kind of a backwards place. Yeah, Kansans are really kind of interesting. The first thing I ever noticed about people from Kansas, they only follow their own traffic laws. So if they're in Texas, they don't follow the Texas traffic laws. They drive as fast as they want. They only drive the speed limit in Kansas, and the speed limit in Kansas is pretty high. But it was really weird. These guys are just passing you like crazy, and you're going, who is that? And then you look at their license plate, and it's a guy from Kansas. And I don't know what's wrong with these people. They just think they're better than everybody else, I guess. Really kind of weird. You notice that people from different places have different ideas, and you know that they came from, I don't know where it came from, maybe their moms, maybe their dads, maybe their school system is skewed, but people from Missouri tend to be really, really racist. Just really horrible. And so where did all this Black Lives Matter thing start? Right outside of St. Louis in Missouri. Weird. Anyway. Being in the military, you get to see all these people all the time.
Oh.
You have to figure all this stuff out. Weird. Or maybe the people at Reed's Air Force Base in Texas were just, the people from Kansas were not very good people. Maybe that was it. Maybe the 20 or 30 guys from Kansas were just jerks or something. Putting paleontological information with DNA analysis in a study called convergent evolution. So we can look at the fossils, we can look at the DNA, and we can determine what happened in the past. One of the things that we've been looking for, we wanted to compare the DNA of Neanderthal man with Homo sapiens sapien with us. We wanted to compare it with us. There were some people that were saying, oh, Neanderthal man, we don't have any more of that DNA. That he fell out of the gene pool too long ago. We couldn't reproduce with his kind, so there was no mixture of Neanderthal man and Homo sapiens sapien. And then we finally found some Neanderthal DNA. We tested it, and one of the things we discovered is that if you live, if you're from Europe, then you probably have Neanderthal DNA. The only people that don't have Neanderthal DNA are Africans, people that live in Africa today. They don't have any Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals were all north, and they all moved into Europe, and they moved into Asia. So if you're of Asian descent, if you are Micronesian, if you're any of those individuals that traveled away from Africa, then you had Neanderthal DNA. So where does that leave you guys? Do you guys have Neanderthal DNA? Yeah, you migrated out of Africa just like the Europeans did. Yeah, so you guys have Neanderthal DNA just like I do. I have Neanderthal DNA. And actually, I had an uncle that looked like all those mock-ups of the Neanderthal man. So I assume I probably have a little bit more than everybody else does. Not only that, he grunted when he talked. So he talked like this. And people could understand what he said. So one time he had a stroke. He had a stroke. And they took him into the hospital, and they kept him for like ever. And my mom went to visit him, and she said, well, you seem okay. He said, I don't know, they just won't let me out of here. And so she went to talk to the doctor, and his doctor said, I'm waiting until his speech pattern improves. And my mom said, you know he's always talked like that, don't you? So they let him out of the hospital. He was fine. But this was back in the 50s and 60s when computers were brand new, and he actually, he was a really smart guy. So he had nothing to do, so he's sitting there and he's looking at this lady's computer, and he actually improved on the computer. So part of the computer that you have today has to do with my uncle. Now my uncle was one of these idiots that just did things, and when he did things, he'd just leave them. So he changed the computer. This lady had a friend that her husband was a computer scientist at Ball State. This is in Muncie. At Ball State, he took the idea that my uncle had, and he put it into the computer. He patented it, and guess how much money he's got today? Well, he's dead, but yeah. My uncle, who just gave it away, I can tell you more stories about that uncle. That uncle didn't want his wife to take his money. So instead of taking his paycheck home, he left him. He never took his paycheck because he didn't want his wife to spend his money. This is how stupid he is. And eventually the secretary started stealing those checks. Yeah, and she started cashing the checks. I don't know what he thought. He's just an idiot. Well, he's a brilliant idiot. Anyway, two of the fastest swimmers in the ocean are tuna and dolphin. Tuna and dolphin. Each evolved for efficient swimming, and so there are similarities in their structure. They're both quite thin. They're both quite aerodynamic, or they would be if you were thrown into the air. They're hydrodynamic, I guess you'd have to say. However, the dolphin is a mammal, of course, and the tuna is a fish. Similar structures due to convergent evolution are called homoplasy, similar development. And so they have similar development, but they're totally different species. They're not even in the same family. One's a fish and the other's a mammal, as odd as that seems. And also their tail fins are one's horizontal, the other's vertical. They have stabilizer fins on top. That's the dorsal fin. And they have I don't know what the fin underneath is called. It's a stabilizer fin. You know, these have their dorsal fin and their stabilizer fin are both in the same area. Anyway, they can move their tails really fast. Humans, of course, when we swim, if we swim really fast, we try to do the dolphin kick, where we move our legs up and down. It's one of the reasons why Michael Phelps, who is an oddly shaped individual, that's one of the reasons he can swim so fast. The reality is he has long thighs, and he has short calves. Okay. So that allows him to use his thighs to move his calves. And so he can move his thighs and calves very similarly to the dolphin. And because he can do that better than anybody else, he swims faster than anybody else. And he still owns several world records because of that. So if you want to swim really fast, you need short calves and long thighs. And of course, there are some people with short calves and long thighs, but they're short people. The Asians have short calves and long thighs. And it's one of the reasons why if you try to sit down, if you try to sit on your heel like this, the old baseball, you know, if you try to do that, I have to lift my heels from the floor because my calves are so heavy. But they can actually sit on their heels. Asians can. So have you been to Asia? Have you been to Japan? Okay. They'll sit in the street. They'll sit down like that, and they can sit like that for hours. If we do that, of course, we have to be up on our toes because our thighs are so long. Is that right? Our thighs are short and our calves are long. So we have to be up on our toes in order for that to work. But they don't. They can sit back. They can put their feet flat on the ground and actually sit down on their heels. Put their butts on their heels. And they can sit like that for hours. And you'll see women doing that with babies on their back. You know, anyway, they have a different body shape. But they would make good swimmers if they were taller. Michael Phelps is like 6'4" or something. So he's 6'4" and he's got these weirdly shaped legs. He's also got a strangely shaped. He's also double jointed in his knees. He's double jointed in his elbows and his wrists. So he gets a lot more flap out of swimming. You know, he can exaggerate his movements. What will happen to Michael Phelps as he gets older, all of these things that he's using in his swimming, his double jointedness, the fact that his thighs are long and his calves are short, all of this is going to come back and repeat on him. He's going to start getting arthritis in those joints because he's used them so much. Homology, study of similarities, looks at similarities between body structures of animals with common ancestry. A good example of homology is the forelimb of several mammals. Outwardly they seem so different, but the structure is very similar. This is a seal. As you can see, the seal has the same arm structure as the human does. Dog has the same structure as well, and so does the bat, oddly enough. All the bones that are in the human arm are in the bat's arm, the bat's wing. We can see it there. And same way with the seal. There was a video over the weekend of a seal killing an octopus and throwing it in a kayaker's face. I don't know why he did it, but a seal did that. He just flipped it up into his face. Outwardly, they seem different, but of course the structure is the same. Analogy refers to two structures that have similar function, and that's known as an analogy. So we're looking for homology. Classification of species begins in general terms and runs to more and more specific, the more and more specific. Kingdom is the most general term. Living creatures are broken into 5 kingdoms: Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, Monera, which is bacteria, and Protista. Protista is a different structure. It's something that you have probably only seen in biology class. The main subdivision of a kingdom is known as a phylum. There are 3 phyla: Chordata, Mollusca, and Arthropoda. The main subdivision of a phylum is a class. Some classes within the phylum: Chordata, Mammalia, Aves, and Reptilia. The main subdivision of a class is an order. Some orders within the class: Mammalia, Carnivora, Herbivora, and Primates. So they either eat meat, they eat plants, or they are animal, or they are primates like humans and monkeys. The main subdivision of an order is the family, such as the Canidae and Felidae. The main subdivision of a family is genus, such as Canis and Vulpes. Canidae and Felidae are cats and dogs. Okay. Canis and Vulpes are foxes and dogs, and wolves, Canis. The main subdivision of a genus is a species, such as Canis familiaris. Canis familiaris are all the dogs you have at your house, not the wild dogs. Wolves and coyotes. You really don't want to mix wild dogs with domestic dogs. Up in Montana, they used to brag about their dog being part
Wolf.
well, not wolf. They killed all the wolves. Coyote. They wanted their dog to be part coyote. That'd make it meaner. So they were all looking for these mean dogs. The reality was, you really don't want a wild dog to have any wild dog. Where were we? Oh, at Fort Belknap, they brought, this guy was bringing around wolves. They were trying to reintroduce wolves to Montana, and they actually did. But he was trying to show how coyotes and wolves and dogs aren't the same. And so he brought a wild wolf that he had raised from a puppy into the classroom. And despite the fact that this wolf was completely domesticated, he still acted differently. One of the things he told us as we were sitting there was don't make eye contact with him. He needs to identify everybody in the classroom before he feels comfortable. So here this dog is walking around sniffing everybody, and he was also looking to see who you were. So those of us who had dogs at home, he was sniffing a lot. Okay. Wolves and domestic dogs actually occupied the same niche. So my dogs were his enemies. And of course the guy could tell, even though he had no clue, he could tell by what the wolf did as to whether we had dogs. He could also tell whether we had big dogs or little dogs. Yeah. And the person that he sniffed the most was me, because I had a red Doberman Pinscher, a red Dobie. He was a big dog. He weighed about 150 pounds. And the person he sniffed the most was me. And he actually showed his teeth a couple times to a couple people, but those were to people that had pit bulls. That was interesting. That was really kind of fascinating. The coyote was really interesting. He did the same thing kind of that the wolf did, but coyotes and wolves are actually occupy the same niche as well. So they went in different directions, and they didn't come anywhere close to each other. They stayed a whole classroom apart. So they're both walking around sniffing, but the coyote kept his distance from the wolf. He had to take them out at different times, the coyote and the wolf. Really kind of fascinating. There's a reason why coyotes and domestic dogs usually don't breed, and that's because their breeding season is not the same. It's at different times. So the dogs will come into heat at a different time than a coyote will, anyway. And of course, no dogs don't breed with foxes. That would be interesting. While Darwin's theory was widely accepted, no one really knew or understood how change took place until biologist Hugo de Vries. Working with primroses, de Vries proved that sudden changes were caused spontaneously by mutations. And of course, that's where we get the ruby red grapefruit, fruit with no seeds. It had to have been a mutation. Of course, creating a fruit with no seeds means that it can never reproduce. It will never reproduce. So how in the world do we have so many trees that grow ruby red grapefruit with no seeds. How do we do that? And we can't take these seeds, well, there are no seeds, so you can't take seeds and plant them and grow a new tree, so where did they come from?
Roots of a tree.
I guess you could do that. Mostly it's grafting. They take a grapefruit tree and they will graft a limb onto it that grows seedless. Yeah, that's how they have to do it. So one of the things that we have an orchard back in Iowa, and one of the things we do is we try to grow apple trees. Well, sometimes the apple tree will die, but the apple tree won't die completely. It's just the top of it that dies, and then the bottom will start growing. Well, what has happened in several cases is that a miniature tree has been grafted onto a natural, a regular sized tree. And so we've got a couple trees that started out as miniature trees that the top part died and only the bottom part lived, the roots and whatnot. And now we have a full-grown apple tree rather than a miniature apple tree, which is what most people try to grow. I know, it gets kind of weird. We have one tree that started out as a peach tree and now it's a pear tree. And the reason is because the peach tree graft died off of it and now it's a pear tree. We thought it was going to be a peach tree. You never know what you're going to get. Genetic studies subsequently demonstrated that chromosomes provided the building blocks of inheritance. Later, genes were identified as the building blocks of chromosomes. Watson and Crick demonstrated that DNA was arranged in a double helix made up of nucleic acid, and this is what the double helix looks like. You have your DNA you have half of your DNA from your mother, half of your DNA from your father, and it connects itself at the right place. I mean, otherwise you get all kinds of strange things, but because it does it perfectly. The mother's DNA for ears and the father's DNA for ears go together. Whatever is dominant is what your ears are going to look like. Your eye color is the same way. There are some things that are dominant, some things that are recessive. Blue eyes are recessive, brown eyes are dominant. I married a woman with brown eyes. I have blue eyes. I had 2 children. And both of them have brown eyes, so probably she was brown eye. She couldn't produce blue-eyed children. That's what I'm guessing. Because, well, we had 2 kids, and she's never had any other children. So I'm guessing she was brown eye.
Now that you talk about brown eyes and blue eyes, I remember staying with a family where the father had brown eyes and the mother had blue eyes, and the kids, some of them had brown eyes, but had blue eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother had brown eyes and my dad had blue eyes. My dad could only give a blue-eyed gene. My mother could give either a brown-eyed gene or a blue-eyed gene, and I obviously had blue eyes, so she evidently had a blue-eyed gene in there, a recessive trait, and half of her children turned out with blue eyes, and the other half turned out with brown. All the smart ones turned out with blue eyes. And all the dumb ones turned out with brown eyes. But one of the blue-eyed children is a hyper-conservative Nazi. So, I know, it's not me. Okay. Which is kind of interesting, isn't it? And I have 2 brothers and a sister with brown eyes. And there were 2 brothers and a sister with blue eyes. My blue-eyed sister has since died, which is kind of interesting. So, I mean, maybe the brown-eyed children are hardier than the blue-eyed children. My blue-eyed brother, who's the Nazi, also has spinal stenosis. So his spine, pretty soon he's not going to be able to walk at all. So of all the blue-eyed children, I'm really the only hardy one that there is. All three brown-eyed children are still alive.
Are you older than him, or is he older?
He's younger than I am.
Oh, okay.
He's younger than I am. He has spinal stenosis, which means it's a narrowing of the spinal column, and it starts limiting your mobility. He developed that when he was in Kuwait. They sent him. He was in the military, and they sent him over to Kuwait, and he thought it was a heart attack. They thought it was a heart attack, so they sent him to Germany. They sent him to Wiesbaden, and they discovered that it wasn't a heart attack. It was spinal stenosis that was causing his pain and causing his problem. Anyway, so one of these days, well, he may not be mobile now. I don't know. We don't communicate because he's a Nazi, like I told you. He's not really. He's just very conservative. Anyway, okay, so Watson and Crick are the ones that figured this out. He's also 4 inches taller than I am, which is kind of irritating. I've got a picture of my brothers and I, and I'm the shortest damn one. I mean, that doesn't seem quite fair. I also have the biggest feet. So I have the biggest feet, I'm shortest in height, and I've got the longest feet. I don't know if that means anything. I'm guessing it doesn't.
That means you'll run faster.
Well, I do run faster than all of them. I mean, obviously.
He's a Hall of Famer.
I'm a Hall of Famer, exactly. Yeah. And I may be admitted to my college Hall of Fame, so we'll see what happens. I held a record for 44 years. That's a long time to hold a record. Today, the Modern Genome Project gives us an ever-expanding view of the makeup of humans as compared to other creatures. Researchers have determined that species who have to hunt for their food, such as humans and carnivores, have bigger brains than animals who don't have to search for their food, such as ungulates. And of course, an example of an ungulate would be the deer. Deers amaze me. Their heads are tiny and their bodies are big. They don't ever have to worry about finding food. All they have to do is, as long as they're not standing on the road, they can put their head down and eat whatever there is there. But humans, of course, we have to hunt for our food, whether it's orange juice, bacon and eggs, or a muffin. It really doesn't. We have to hunt for our food, so we have bigger brains. And of course, humans, our fingernails are not very good for tearing food. Our teeth are certainly not sharp enough to tear food. So we not only need to find our food, but we also have to prepare it in a way that we can eat it. If you think of a deer, my goodness, he doesn't have to worry about anything. My goodness. All he has to worry about is not getting hit by a semi. Somebody hit a cow between here and Chin Lee.
Gosh, there were like a lot of cows over the weekend. They were mostly black. Like this, I can't see them.
Yeah, it's like, it's laying on its side. It's like this tall. There were dogs just gnawing on the thing.
There was one between where wheat fields on that bridge.
Uh-huh.
He got hit right there, and they had to. I think they used a tractor to
Pull him off.
Yeah. It's on the side. After you leave the lake, if you're going towards Fort Defiance, it's on here on the exit off the road.
Wow. What do you do with a dead cow? What my neighbor in Montana, we used to just pull them off into the pasture and let them decompose. Pull them someplace where the other animals weren't going to get around them, and the coyotes could come and eat them, or horses, or whatever died. You'd just pull it out off into the valley and let the animals take care of it. But I don't know what you guys do here. I guess that's what they do here too.
Yeah.
This is pull them off where they don't contaminate. They stink. I mean, they really start stinking. And the smell's going to last for about a month until they're pretty much gone. The more novel the means of obtaining food, the larger the forebrain of the animal. Magpies have been known to dig up potatoes. This is a magpie. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a magpie. House sparrows have been seen picking the insect insects off of car radiator grills, and that's a house sparrow. Crows have been known to drop rocks, rock-hard palm nuts in front of cars that run over them and open them up. And of course, you've got these guys are all over the place right here. Yeah. I think those are ravens. These are really big. I mean, these are bigger than any crows I've ever seen. Of course, in our part of the country, they shoot crows. They kill them if they see them because they'll strip a field if you're not careful. Usually a cornfield. They don't mess with wheat or soybeans, but they'll strip a cornfield. Birds who store food will have a larger hippocampus than birds who don't. The hippocampus is necessary for memory, thus a larger one is needed for those species that rely on memory for survival. The acorn woodpecker, Clark's nutcracker, and the black-caped chickadee. This is a chickadee, this is a Clark's nutcracker, and this is the acorn woodpecker. They store food, so they have to remember where they stored it. So they have a bigger hippocampus. The difference between the brains of humans and the brains of other mammals are mostly quantitative. Rats and humans are similar in that each has a brain that represents about 2% of their total body weight. There's a hint and a warning. Rats, there's a disease called rat disease. It's a type of hepatitis E. Right now we have hepatitis A, B, C, and D. This is hepatitis E. It's spread by rats. The first human has come down with this in Hong Kong. So it's in the human population now. So just a hint and a warning, stay away from rats, especially if they have hepatitis. Anyway, normally rats and humans don't spread diseases. The bubonic plague, of course, was spread by rats, but it wasn't the rat itself that was spreading the disease. It was the flea off the rat that was spreading the disease, bubonic plague, caused by Yersinia pestis. So rats and humans have we utilize about the same body mass for our brains, about 2% of the total body weight. The basic differences have mostly to do with the sizes of the cerebrum of the human and the prominent increase in surface due to the gyri and the sulci, the convolutions and the dips in the brain. And that's what as you can see, the human brain is far more extensive than the rat brain. It's fairly smooth, so there's not a whole lot of thinking going on here. Tons and tons of thinking going on there, to the point of depression and anxiety and whatnot. I've never seen an anxious rat or a depressed rat. I would imagine they wouldn't live very long. Rats don't miss out completely. They have a much larger olfactory bulb than humans, and so they have a much stronger sense of smell. They can smell out food inside containers and whatnot. This is a rat brain. This is a monkey brain, and that's a human brain. The nervous system of vertebrates have several similarities. They develop from a hollow dorsal neural tube. They show bilateral symmetry. Segmentation is present. Pairs of spinal nerves extend from each side at each level of the spinal cord. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are separate. Localization is present. Certain functions are controlled by certain locations in the central nervous system, and those are the similarities. Anthropologists and comparative biologists assume that all vertebrates have these features in common because they descended from a common ancestor. That has to do with evolution. So we're not in Kansas, so I can teach evolution. Thank God. Invertebrates are another story. There are 17 phyla that cover the invertebrates, while vertebrates have only one. So there's 17 different invertebrates, 17 phyla of invertebrates, and there's only one vertebrate type. It has been estimated that for every human on Earth, there are over 1 billion insects. So there's 7 billion humans on Earth, and if you multiply, well, that's how many insects there are. Tons and tons. I seem to have lots of mosquitoes in my house for some reason. Haven't quite figured that one out yet. I think it's because of my next door neighbor is Ed Harris. Do you know Ed? He has a garden, and this is the first year he's had a garden, and I've just got tons and tons of mosquitoes. So I think they're coming out of his garden
Yeah.
because he waters the damn garden.
Yes. And
Yeah.
there's water that probably just sits, just.
To some extent. Yeah, so the mosquitoes are eating me alive. I've lived all over the world, and I've been bitten by mosquitoes every place I've been. I can assure you that. But these mosquitoes, they'll leave a welt, and that welt will last for a week. It won't go away. So evidently, I'm having some kind of an allergic reaction to. Come on in. That's okay, Tyrone. You're okay. The basic plan as far as vertebrates and invertebrates are concerned, all vertebrates and most invertebrates share a basic plan that consists of a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system. This is the grasshopper. As you can see, the central nervous system runs all the way down to its tail, starts at its head. It doesn't have the same cerebellum and cerebrum and whatnot that we have. As you can see, this is the human central nervous system. Also runs down to our tail. But we have a thinking portion. We actually have a brain. They don't have a brain. So if you ever torture a grasshopper or an insect, probably, potentially, you're not really torturing them because they can only react to things. There's no thinking, okay? If you torture you can torture a vertebrate, but you can't torture an invertebrate. I used to have friends that would they'd catch a locust, or they would catch a grasshopper, and they'd stick a piece of grass in their abdomen, a hard piece of grass, a long piece of grass, and then they'd throw them up in the air and watch them fly away. I know it sounds like torture, but the reality, now I know that they really were torturing these animals, these insects.
I have a praying mantis that's been around my house.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, if you step on it, or if you crush half of it, it's not suffering, wiggling its body. It's just trying to live. That's all it knows, is living and dying and reproducing. There are animals that don't have any mouths. They can't eat. And they only live for 24 hours. So what the hell are they doing here? They're serving as food for other animals, of course, while they're alive. But the only thing they can do is reproduce. They've got reproductive organs, and they don't have any mouths or digestive systems. Mayflies are that way. Lacewings are that way. You guys don't have them down here. Anyway, there are insects in the world that only live for 24 hours. But they feed a lot of animals. A lot of animals eat those animals, or those insects. All vertebrates and many invertebrates, including mollusks and insects, have brains. It's a very primitive brain. The general evolutionary trend in both vertebrates and invertebrates is toward increasing brain control over ganglia at a lower level of the body. And of course, this is what an insect brain looks like. It's not very inclusive. And of course, the human brain is getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. Axons of mammalians' neurons are surrounded by myelin, which helps them conduct impulses faster. Invertebrates have no myelin to speed nerve conduction. And of course, we're looking at insect brains. They're really, really simple, okay? Not a whole lot of thinking is taking place. Mostly it's just reacting to things. If we look at present creatures and their fossilized ancestors, we can see that the brain has changed over time, whether it is a bird's brain or a hominid brain. Making a cast of the inside of the skull to map the brain is referred to as an endocast. And this is what we have done. We have taken all of these past hominids, and we've looked at the size of their brains, and we looked at their different chambers of their brains to determine how we have evolved and why we have evolved to be the structure that we are. And of course, here we are. This is us. This is Homo sapien. This is Homo erectus. This is early hominids, the Cro-Magnon man. This is Africanus. This is Afarensis. As you can see, we started out looking like gorillas, and then we evolved to what we are today, a relatively smooth-skulled individual. And if we look at the different sizes of all of the hominids, discounting the chimpanzee and the gorilla, of course the chimpanzee and gorilla have smaller brains, but we started developing as hominids until we are where we are today. Strangely enough, this is not the largest brained hominid. The largest brained hominid was Neanderthal man. Why in the world were their brains so big? Can you think of any reason why these guys would have bigger brains than modern man? What was it about Neanderthal man? They're the people that had to turn their skin paler. That didn't have anything to do with that. Was natural selection. All the dark-skinned people died. When we're talking about dark-skinned people, we're talking probably really dark-skinned people. They lost all their hair at that point. They were also living around glaciers, and that may have had something to do with it. Huge brains. As you can see, this is Neanderthal man. The average size of the Neanderthal man was 7,500 cc's. Ours is 7,000 cc's. And here we are right here. This is us, modern man. Ours is a lot smoother. Their occipital lobe was larger. And for that reason, they say, well, they weren't really smarter than modern man. It's just that they needed that portion of their brain. Now, what the occipital lobe, why it expanded, occipital lobe would do anything, I mean, that's the part you see with. Maybe they were always looking through mist. I don't know. Who knows? Neanderthal man started in the Middle East, spread throughout Europe and into Eastern Europe, which is still fairly cloudy to this day. I don't know. It's really kind of an interesting argument. And of course, there we are. This is humans, total volume in cubic centimeters. As you can see, the humans have had some fairly small brains, and then, I'm sorry, this is a medulla, cerebellum, and the neocortex. And our neocortex is much larger than the rhesus monkey. And there you go. Anyway, and that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 6?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I know, yeah, evolution has always fascinated me. I started studying this stuff when I was over in Germany. And of course, Neander Valley is in Germany. So the first Neanderthal man was found in the Neander Valley in Germany. So I was reading all kinds of stuff. The Germans think they're smarter than everybody else anyway, which is kind of interesting. But so I started even looking at this stuff in the place where the Neanderthal man was first discovered. Just fascinating stuff. And I've got my own ideas. I told you about my uncle that actually looked like Neanderthal man. Okay. So I had a feeling that he was, of course he couldn't talk either, had all those problems. And he was so stupid that he didn't take any of his paychecks home. That's got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When my mother told me, his family was actually raised by his wife. His wife took care of his family. She was a chicken plucker. She plucked chickens for a living. And that's how they survived. And he worked every day, but he never took his paycheck. And after a while, that lady started stealing them. I mean, checks are only good for 120 days. After 120 days, they're no longer any good. I don't know what they did. Okay, well, I'll see you guys next time. And we'll tackle chapter 7, or we'll start on chapter 7, which talks about the same stuff, kind of. Anyway, yeah, I've always found evolution just fascinating.
evolution and stuff like that, being, we're like in a modern age, and we have all these sorts of institutions like prisons and higher learning.
Both of them are types of institutions where you imprison people. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so humans have evolved, and for most of our evolution, of course, we had churches, but we didn't have prisons or whatnot. If somebody did something wrong, we killed them. We just executed them, which could get interesting, I guess, if you don't have a judge or whatever. Or if you have a judge like Judge Kavanaugh. Geez, the guy went off the rails the other
I
day.
saw some pictures of that. He's like,
He's screaming.
yeah.
And he's blaming the Democrats.
And you can see the ladies behind him all on gas. Like,
What the hell's wrong with this? Do I want a judge who goes off the rails like that?
Is your recording still on?
I'm sorry?
Is it still on? Your recording?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.